"You've got a 7 p.m. deadline," my boss texted me. Meanwhile, he was lying in my bed with my wife. At the time, I didn't know that. I didn't know what that text would eventually mean, how it would be the first sign of everything falling apart. I just saw another task, another impossible request dumped on me. As always, I obeyed. When I read the text, I didn't think much of it. Another demand from Mike, my boss. Another long night ahead. I had grown accustomed to it by then. He was always pushing me beyond my limits, but I didn't mind. Work had always come first. I buried myself in it, and it was easier than facing the cracks in my personal life. I didn't know it at the time, but that message wasn't just about work. It marked the beginning of everything crumbling. I didn't notice anything unusual when I got home that night. The house was quiet as usual when I came in late. Olivia was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. The kids were in their rooms, their voices faint in the distance. The familiar scent of dinner hung in the air. It was normal, the kind of normal I had gotten used to. "Hey, babe. Long day?" Olivia asked, glancing up at me briefly as she continued chopping. "Same as always," I muttered, dropping my briefcase onto the couch. But as she turned back to the counter, something caught my eye. Her phone. The screen was glowing, a message notification flashing on it. It wasn't unusual for her to leave her phone lying there, but this time, something about it caught my attention. I didn't say anything about it at first. I didn't want to seem paranoid, but something inside me shifted. My gaze lingered on the phone for a moment longer than usual, and when she looked up at me again, I noticed it. Her eyes darted away too quickly, a slight flicker of discomfort in her expression. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice a little too sweet, a little too practiced. "Yeah, just tired," I said, trying to push the uneasy feeling down. Another long day at work. I didn't question her about it. I didn't want to seem like I was overreacting, but the sense of discomfort gnawed at me. I couldn't shake it. She returned to chopping vegetables, humming to herself, but I didn't see her the same way anymore. Something was off. The air in the room felt thicker, like there was something between us that hadn't been there before. I didn't confront her that night. I told myself I was overthinking it, that I was just tired, and my mind was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Later, lying in bed, I replayed the scene in my mind. Her reaction, the way she avoided my eyes. It wasn't just about the phone, it was the way she had acted, the little things I had ignored for so long. I couldn't get rid of the feeling that something was wrong. And the worst part? I was terrified of what I might find if I dug deeper. The next morning, I started making plans. Quietly. I wouldn't let Olivia know. I wouldn't confront her just yet. I had to be sure. I had to find out what was really going on. And that terrified me even more. The next few days passed in a fog. The house felt off, like something was just a little too still. Olivia's behavior was subtly different, but enough for me to notice. She wasn't as chatty, didn't ask about my day as much. When I came home late from work, she would still be there, but not as present. She'd be staring at her phone more often, eyes glued to the screen, and when I approached, she would quickly put it down or switch tabs. At first, I tried to convince myself I was overthinking it. Maybe she was just tired too, or had a lot on her mind. But as the days went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The phone, the distance, the little lies that seemed to creep in, the way she avoided eye contact. I'd seen all these signs before in movies or books, and I knew what it meant, but I didn't want to admit it. I remember one evening, sitting in the living room, scrolling through my phone as Olivia washed dishes. She was humming a tune under her breath, but it sounded different somehow, more forced. Her movements seemed slower, like she was trying to avoid being noticed. Then, a few days later, I ran into an old friend at the park. It was one of those chance encounters. We hadn't seen each other in ages, so the conversation started out casual enough. "Hey man, long time no see," he greeted me, offering a handshake. "Yeah, been busy," I replied, shaking his hand and smiling. We chatted for a while, talking about work and mutual acquaintances. Then, almost out of nowhere, he mentioned something that immediately grabbed my attention. "I saw Olivia the other day. She was with some guy at that cafe by the park. I thought it was you at first, but then I realized it wasn't. She was sitting with him, so I just thought I'd go say hi. But when I walked over, I realized it wasn't you," he said, scratching the back of his neck. He was a bit older, maybe mid-40s. Looked like a normal guy, nothing special. I froze for a second. I didn't know why, but hearing it come from someone else made it feel more real. My thoughts raced. "What do you mean? Who was he?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Well, she introduced him as Robert when I walked up. She seemed friendly enough, nothing weird. I just thought it was odd, you know? I've never heard you mention a Robert. My stomach twisted, and I forced myself to nod, trying to make it seem like it didn't affect me. Robert? Huh? Never heard of him either. He shrugged. Yeah, probably just some guy from her work or something. Anyway, just thought I'd mention it. Take care, man. Thanks, I said, still feeling a strange knot in my stomach. Talk soon. I watched him walk away, but I couldn't shake the conversation. Robert. Why had she introduced him like that? And why had she never mentioned him to me before? My mind raced with the possibilities, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I kept telling myself it was nothing, that maybe it was just a colleague or a casual acquaintance. But something about it didn't sit right. That night, when I got home, Olivia was in the kitchen, humming quietly to herself as she cooked. The sight of her made my stomach churn a little. I couldn't stop thinking about the mention of Robert, her strange behavior over the past few days. But I didn't ask her anything. Not yet. I didn't want to seem paranoid. I didn't want to jump to conclusions without having all the facts. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The little things, the way she was acting, it all pointed to the same conclusion. Later that evening, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. I replayed everything in my mind. Robert. Why had she introduced him like that? Why hadn't she told me about him before? There were too many questions and no answers. I tried to push the thoughts away, but they wouldn't go. The gnawing feeling in my gut grew stronger. I had to find out the truth, and I had to do it on my own. The next day, I made the decision to act. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. I needed to gather more information. I needed to know for sure. I called a private investigator. The moment the phone clicked off, I felt sick. But I knew it was the only way. I couldn't let my suspicions fester any longer. I had to know. And the worst part? I had no idea what I was going to find. The investigator's photos came the next evening. I sat alone in the living room, my hands trembling slightly as I opened the email. The photos were clear, too clear. There they were, my wife and Robert, sitting together at the cafe. She was smiling at him, her eyes alight in a way I hadn't seen in months, maybe longer. They were close. Too close. She had her hand on his arm, leaning in toward him as they laughed. It was everything I had feared. My stomach twisted into knots as I stared at the pictures. A cold, steady anger began to form in my chest. This was real. This wasn't some misunderstanding. This wasn't just a friend. This was betrayal. But then it hit me. I didn't need to second guess. I saw the way he sat, the familiar posture, the face. It was Mike, my boss. I had seen him every day at work, the man I had trusted, the man who had pushed me for years, who had made me sacrifice time with my family. And now here he was, sitting next to my wife in a cafe, laughing with her as though nothing was wrong. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Mike. He had been with my wife. The one person who I had relied on for years, the one person who I thought had my back, was the one who was betraying me. I couldn't breathe for a moment. I just sat there, staring at the pictures, as everything I had built began to fall apart. The betrayal was deeper than I had ever imagined. It wasn't just Olivia. It was Mike. My boss, my colleague, the one man I trusted most in my life. I heard the distant sounds of my children playing in their rooms. The house, once so familiar and comforting, now felt alien to me. The laughter that I used to take for granted now seemed distant, like it belonged to someone else. A family that wasn't mine. I took a deep breath. I couldn't let the anger consume me. Not yet. Not when I still didn't have everything I needed. I had to remain calm. I had to plan my next moves carefully. The pictures were proof, but I needed more. I needed more to make sure that what I was going to do next would bring down the weight of justice. I wasn't going to let this go without taking control. I started going through our bank accounts. Small withdrawals caught my eye, lunches, dinners at expensive places, transactions that didn't make sense. Olivia had been spending money on things that didn't fit with the family budget. Her work meetings with Mike were now turning into something more sinister. I transferred some savings into a separate account. It wasn't a drastic move yet, but it was one I knew would protect me. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but I needed to be ready for the worst. The next step was a lawyer. I couldn't wait any longer to take action. The damage had already been done. The lawyer would help me understand what I needed to do to secure my position legally, especially if it came down to a custody battle. I met the lawyer the next morning. She was efficient, professional. After a brief conversation, we discussed the divorce process and how to prepare for it. She recommended I start gathering more evidence, more financial records, and also make sure I had a clear picture of Olivia's behavior. I walked out of the office with a sense of resolve. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. She had crossed a line, and I was ready to cross the next. Later that day, I received a call from the investigator. He had followed Olivia the past couple of days, tracking her movements, watching her meet Mike again. She's been meeting him at the same cafe every week, he said. It's the same routine, leaves her office, meets him for about an hour, sometimes longer. I've got more photos, but it's clear. This isn't casual. Send them to me, I said, my voice cold. He did. The new photos confirmed everything I already knew. This wasn't just a few innocent lunches. This was a secret life she had built without me. The anger inside me was quiet but sharp. It was as though something inside me had snapped. She didn't deserve my rage. She deserved my calculation, my quiet revenge. I stared at the photos for a long time. I didn't feel the urge to shout, to scream at her. No, I would do this on my terms. She wouldn't see me coming. The next day, I began preparing for my next steps. I didn't confront her yet. I wasn't ready to face her, not until I had everything in place. But now, the pieces were falling into place. The puzzle of her betrayal was clear. I just needed to finish it. I started making calls to transfer assets, organizing the papers. There was no turning back. This would be my life now, fighting for what was mine, fighting for my children's future. And I wasn't going to let her ruin it. Not without paying for the consequences of her actions. The following days felt like a blur, but the clarity in my mind was sharper than ever. I kept replaying the images in my head. Olivia, smiling at Mike, leaning in close, touching his arm. The photos the investigator sent me only confirmed the truth, but somehow, I still felt like I was waiting for the final blow to fall. The truth was undeniable, but I wasn't sure if I was ready to face the consequences. Still, I knew I couldn't go on pretending that everything was fine. I had to confront this head-on, but I wasn't about to let her think she could just walk away from this. No, Olivia was going to pay, and so was Mike. I didn't say anything to her the night I got the photos, or the next day. I stayed calm, just like I had planned. I needed to gather everything before I acted. Every piece of evidence, every detail. There was no room for mistakes. But it wasn't just the photos anymore. It was the way Olivia had been acting. She still didn't know that I knew. She didn't suspect that I was slowly building my case. But I wasn't going to confront her directly. Not yet. The first thing I did was take another look at our finances. I knew she'd been spending money, some of it on Mike, but most of it was on dinners, lunches, things that didn't fit with our usual budget. I went through our joint account with a fine-tooth comb. There were more transactions than I had realized, and I wasn't just angry. I was disgusted. The next step was talking to my lawyer. I had to be ready for what came next. Divorce, custody, everything. The lawyer advised me to start looking at ways to protect my assets, but the reality of the situation hit me hard. I was going to have to fight for everything. It wasn't long before I started making the changes. I transferred some money into a separate account, preparing for the worst-case scenario. I didn't trust Olivia to be truthful with me anymore, and I didn't trust that she wouldn't drain our savings if I wasn't careful. I also made sure to get an appointment with a private investigator to dig deeper into Mike's involvement. I needed to know everything about him. His relationship with Olivia wasn't just an affair. It was far more complicated. He was my boss, and now, he was my enemy. I told myself that I would wait for the right moment to make my move. But as I stood in front of my computer, going over every little detail, I realized that there was never going to be a perfect moment. I couldn't keep waiting. I had to act now. The next day, Olivia came home from work earlier than usual. I didn't let it faze me. I could tell something was off, but I kept my cool. She didn't say much when she walked in, just the usual, "How was your day?" and "What's for dinner?" But I noticed the way she moved, the way she avoided eye contact, the way her shoulders were tense, like she was waiting for something. It was almost as if she knew something was about to change. "Olivia," I started, my voice steady, "I know about you and Mike." She froze, just for a second, but it was enough. It wasn't the shock of being caught, but the realization that she had been playing me all along. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice too calm. I didn't answer her. I didn't need to. She knew exactly what I meant. The silence between us was thick, suffocating. The lie she had been living, the web of deceit she had carefully crafted, was finally coming undone. "I've been watching," I said, my tone cold. "I know everything. I know about you and Mike." Her eyes shifted, Her breath quickened. For the first time, I saw fear flicker in her eyes. "David, please," she started, but I cut her off. "No, you don't get to beg. Not after everything you've done," I said, my voice growing colder. "You've betrayed me. You've betrayed our family. And now you're going to face the consequences." She opened her mouth to respond, but the words didn't come. Instead, she stared at me, her eyes full of a mix of guilt and denial. But I wasn't looking for excuses anymore. I wasn't interested in her apologies. I had already made my decision. That night, after she went to bed, I made more calls. I contacted a private investigator, a financial expert, and another lawyer to start preparing everything. I wasn't going to let Olivia or Mike get away with this. They had crossed the line, and now it was time for them to pay. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing. I was done being the victim. It was time for me to take control of my life again, and I wasn't going to let them ruin everything I had worked so hard for. The moment I filed the divorce papers, I knew there was no turning back. I had spent days, maybe even weeks, preparing for this. The investigation, the documents, the phone calls, it had all led to this one point. And yet, when I finally handed them over to the lawyer, I felt a strange sense of calm. This wasn't about vengeance anymore. This was about justice. It didn't take long for Olivia to find out. She had always been perceptive, always knew when something was off. When she saw the papers, her face drained of color. But she didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, staring at the papers, the reality of it finally setting in. "What is this?" she asked, her voice shaking. I watched her carefully. There was no guilt, no remorse in her eyes. It was as if she thought she could talk her way out of it. But I wasn't in the mood for excuses. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. "This is the end of our marriage," I said, my voice flat. She shook her head. "David, you don't understand. It's not what you think. Please, just listen to me." "I've listened to you long enough," I replied, cutting her off. "You lied to me. You've been seeing Mike, my boss, behind my back, and now you want me to believe it was some mistake? No, you don't get to lie your way out of this." The anger inside me was quiet, controlled, but it was still there. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to make a scene. I was going to get everything I deserved. Everything my kids deserved. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. "This is happening. You've made your choices. And now, I'm making mine." She stood there, frozen. For a moment, I thought she might say something, beg me to reconsider, but instead, she just nodded, the tears starting to form in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered, but I didn't want her apology. Not now. It was too late for that. The divorce papers weren't the only thing that arrived. A day later, the custody papers followed. The lawyer had been quick, efficient. She advised me to move quickly to prevent any delays. Olivia had already been withdrawing money from our accounts, buying things without any explanation. I wasn't going to let her have control anymore. That night, I sat in my office, going over the papers one last time. The financial statements, the custody agreement, everything was falling into place. I was finally in control again. No more lies. No more secrets. But there was still one more thing I had to do. I needed to make sure Mike, or Robert, as I knew him now, knew he wouldn't get away with it. I wasn't going to let him just walk off into the sunset with my wife. He had betrayed me. He had ruined my life, and now he was going to pay the price. I called a private investigator again. This time, it wasn't about following Olivia. It was about gathering everything I could on Mike. I needed to know who he really was, what he was hiding, and most importantly, how I could use it to my advantage. The investigator came through, as expected. He found out that Mike had been married for years, had a family of his own. It was only a matter of time before his wife found out. And when she did, she wasn't going to be happy. I didn't want to involve her. But the damage had already been done. Mike's life was about to change. The next day, I sent an anonymous letter to his wife. I didn't care how it happened or who told her, but she needed to know the truth. I knew it would tear their marriage apart. I knew it would cause chaos. But that was his price for betraying me, for betraying my family. I didn't care about revenge. I just wanted justice. And justice meant seeing Mike suffer the same way I had. It wasn't enough that Olivia had to pay. He had to pay too. Later that week, I met with the lawyer again to finalize everything. We discussed the next steps, how I would gain full custody of the children, how I would secure my finances, and how we would prepare for the court battle. The paperwork was ready. I just needed to sign it. As I walked out of the lawyer's office, I felt a strange sense of peace. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I was just ready. Ready to move on. Ready to win. When I got home, Olivia was waiting for me, sitting on the couch, her hands folded in her lap. She looked like she had been crying, but I didn't care. "David," she started, her voice weak. "Please. Let's talk. This isn't the end." I looked at her, my gaze cold. "It's over, Olivia. You made your choices. Now, I'm making mine." I wasn't going to let her manipulate me again. I wasn't going to let her tear my life apart any longer. It was time to take back what was mine. The day of the court hearing arrived, and everything in me wanted to be prepared, to be calm, to face Olivia and Mike without showing any sign of weakness. I had spent the past few weeks organizing everything, gathering all the evidence, and working with my lawyer. I was ready. But when I saw Olivia sitting across from me in the courtroom, her eyes red and puffy, I felt something I hadn't anticipated. The anger was still there, the betrayal still burned, but what I felt more than anything was an overwhelming sense of relief. She looked so small, so fragile, sitting there in her formal clothes, trying to appear composed, but I could see through it. I could see the fear in her eyes. She was terrified of what was coming. And for once, it wasn't me who was afraid. It was her. My lawyer stood up first, speaking with authority, laying out the facts, the evidence of financial misconduct, the photos from the private investigator, the bank statements showing the irregularities. He painted a picture of a marriage torn apart by lies, betrayal, and neglect. Then it was Olivia's turn. She took the stand with trembling hands, trying her best to seem sincere, but I could see through it. She started her testimony with the usual apologies, remorse, and explanations. She tried to blame everything on stress, on me, on her work, on anything other than herself. "I wasn't happy," she said, looking at the judge. "I felt alone in our marriage. Mike, my husband's boss, was just someone I could talk to at first. He was there for me when David wasn't." I almost laughed. Of course, she was playing the victim. That was always her game. But I couldn't let her get away with it. Not this time. When it was my turn, I stood up and looked at her. There were no tears. I didn't need to cry. I didn't need to beg. I just needed to speak the truth. I loved her. I gave her everything, I said, my voice calm, steady. But she took that love and destroyed it. And now, we're here. I'm not asking for pity. I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm asking for justice, for me, for my children. My lawyer presented the custody papers. Olivia's attorney tried to fight back, claiming she was the more stable parent, that she could offer the children a better future. But the evidence was clear. She was the one who had broken the trust. She was the one who had destroyed our family. And I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I looked at the judge, waiting for the final decision. I knew there was no way Olivia could win this. She had lost everything. The affair with Mike had sealed her fate. The judge called for a short recess. When we returned, the decision was read aloud. I had won. I was granted full custody of our children. Olivia would be required to pay alimony. Her access to our joint finances was revoked immediately. And the worst part for her? Mike had been served a subpoena. The judge ruled that he would be investigated for his involvement in the affair and for the impact it had on the well-being of my family. His career would likely never recover from this. It was over. As Olivia sat there, her face pale and shocked, I felt no joy. I didn't need to rub it in. She knew she had lost. She knew that everything she had worked for, the trust, the love, was gone. "David," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Please, don't do this. I didn't mean for it to go this far." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. As the court session ended, I turned to my lawyer. "Prepare the paperwork," I said. "Let's finalize everything." Olivia tried to approach me as I walked out of the courtroom, but I held up a hand to stop her. I didn't want to hear her excuses. I didn't need to hear her regret. It was over. The week after the court ruling was a whirlwind. Everything had fallen into place, and now it was time to watch everything else fall apart. Olivia's world, the one she had built on lies and deceit, was beginning to crumble before her eyes, and I wasn't going to stop it. The aftermath of the court hearing was swift. Olivia had been granted the opportunity to appeal, but that wasn't going to stop me. I had already taken the necessary steps to ensure everything fell apart for her. I made sure the documents regarding the divorce were officially filed, finalizing the dissolution of our marriage. I had already leaked the affair to the media, not directly, but through an anonymous source. His colleagues, his friends, they all knew. The man who had once been my boss was now nothing more than a joke, a figure of shame. His wife had found out, of course, and she wasn't going to let him off easy. I knew that if she got her hands on the right information, it would tear him apart. I wasn't just going to let Olivia and Mike live in their little bubble of lies. They had to be exposed. I wasn't going to do it all at once. No, I was going to let them feel the weight of it slowly, gradually. First, I ensured that Olivia lost her access to joint finances. I had already secured everything, transferring my share of our savings into separate accounts. I made sure she couldn't touch the family assets, and the accounts were locked under my control. That was my first victory. The second was more personal. She tried to reach out to me, tried to get me to talk it over, but I ignored every call, every text. The only communication that came from me was cold, direct, and final. I wasn't going to give her the chance to gaslight me anymore. But the biggest shock for her came when her boss called her into a meeting. I had contacted him anonymously as well. I had sent over the proof of her affair with Mike, and suddenly, Olivia wasn't the successful businesswoman she had once been. She was the object of ridicule, and her career was in jeopardy. When she came home that evening, her face was a mask of disbelief. She was shaking, her makeup smudged, and her hands trembled as she reached for the door. I didn't say a word. I watched her try to gather herself, to form some kind of excuse, but it was no use. She had nothing left. "David," she said, voice cracking. "Please, I didn't think it would go this far. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I finally spoke, my voice low and controlled. "You didn't think, Olivia. That's the problem. You thought you could destroy me, my family, and get away with it. But you didn't. And now you'll pay for it." I wasn't angry. Not really. I was calm, collected, and resolute. I wasn't going to waste energy on rage. I had already won. I watched her break down. She tried to grab at my arm, but I stepped back, not letting her touch me. Not anymore. She had no power over me. Then, the call came. The investigator. The next step in my plan. Mike's career was crumbling. His wife had finally confronted him, and the media had picked up on the scandal. He was facing the possibility of losing his job, his reputation, everything he had worked for. It wasn't enough for him to just lose Olivia. I had made sure the entire world would know who he really was. But it wasn't about him anymore. It wasn't even about Olivia anymore. I had won. She had no idea what to do next. She stood there, crying, her hands clutching the edge of the table like it might hold her up. I didn't care. She had nothing left. I wasn't interested in her apologies, her regrets. I had already moved on. Later that night, after the kids were asleep, I sat in the kitchen with a glass of whiskey, staring out the window. The weight of everything finally hit me. The battle was over, and now I was left with the quiet aftermath. The peace. The freedom. I had won. But it wasn't just the legal victory that mattered. It was the fact that I was finally in control again. I didn't need Olivia. I didn't need Mike. All I needed now was to rebuild, to take what was left of my life and make something new out of it. For me, and for my children. And I would do it without any more lies. Without any more betrayal. The days that followed the final court ruling were a blur, but it wasn't a bad kind of blur. It was the kind where everything starts to settle, where the dust from the chaos finally begins to clear. For the first time in months, I could breathe. The weight that had been pressing on my chest, the constant fear of losing everything, was finally gone. I had won. I had taken control, not just of my life, but of my children's future. And nothing, no one, was going to take that away from me. There was a new rhythm to my days now. No more lies, no more pretending. The kids and I were learning to live in this new world, one where they didn't have to witness the chaos of a broken marriage. I didn't have to look over my shoulder or wonder if I'd find another piece of my life shattered by Olivia's lies. In the mornings, we ate breakfast together, laughing about stupid things, just like we always did before everything fell apart. It was simple, but it was real. My kids weren't just a part of my life anymore. They were my reason for breathing, my reason for moving forward. At night, we'd sit down for dinner. Sometimes we'd talk about school, about their friends, about things that mattered to them. Other times, it was just the three of us sitting quietly, comfortable in the silence, knowing that we were safe, that we were okay. Olivia tried to reach out a few times, but I ignored her. She sent messages, emails, even tried to get to me through mutual friends, but I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. She had chosen her path, and I had chosen mine. I wasn't thinking about her anymore. She was in the past, irrelevant to the life I was building now. The real focus was on my children. We started taking trips together, small weekend getaways, spending time at the park, or just hanging out at home. The bond between us grew stronger each day. They could feel the change in me. They saw that I was happier, calmer, and that made all the difference. The house, once a place filled with tension, was now quiet and peaceful. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. It was safe. I started focusing more on myself, too. I hadn't realized just how much I had neglected my own well-being until everything settled. I began running again, something I hadn't done in months. It was a release, a way to clear my mind. I found myself reading more, picking up hobbies I had long since abandoned. I was rediscovering who I was outside of the roles I had played: husband, father, provider. Olivia's voice no longer haunted me. Her manipulation, her lies, they were in the past. I had learned something from it all. I was stronger than I ever thought I was. In the end, that's what mattered most. Not the pain, not the betrayal, not the way my life had fallen apart. What mattered was that I had built something new, something better. And with that, I knew I had finally won.